Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog Series. It is Saturday, March 22nd, 2025. And on Saturdays, we look into sports and add a bit of humor, hopefully. Today, we're talking about March Madness. What is that? Well, many of you already know that this is the tournament time for NCAA basketball. And again, often lovingly referred to as March Madness. Tens of millions of people are going to be rooting for their favorite teams. And just as many probably are going to be filling out brackets trying to predict the winners of each of the games. It's an incredible challenge. If you're just looking at the final 64 teams involved, the dream is to pick the winners of all 63 games leading up to and including the championship game. So if you do that, you'll have accomplished the next to impossible feat of picking a perfect bracket. Now, I did an earlier vlog on my Statistics and Mathematics Monday several weeks ago, and I discussed in some detail why it's basically impossible to pick a perfect bracket. In fact, just picking perfect brackets through the first full weekend of the tournament consists of 3 weekends. So just to survive the first full weekend, basically choosing each team who's going to win these opening rounds of games, or the opening 2 rounds of games, would require basically having some kind of, omniscient power to judge the future, because the odds are at least 1 in 2 billion to do that. But even that's being a bit generous, because you'd have to require certain assumptions, like, for example, that all the number 1 teams are going to win, and then you'd have to have great knowledge about all the other teams. And you'd have to be able to win all of your coin flip picks. What do I mean by coin flips? Well, several games each year and each round typically will come down to the last minute or even the last play or final possession of the game. And essentially, the game can go either way at that point. So, a buzzer beater, somebody makes free throws as time expires or no time left, half-court desperation heave, or a layup that just rims out and you end up losing. Whatever the case, all of these are what I call coin flip games. And so, in short, your odds of winning the Lotto 649 are about 1 in 14 million. And so if you want to play that in Ontario, well, you're much better off, or you have a better chance of winning that than you do of even, as I say, picking just the first slate of games, the first and second round correctly in the NCAA tournament. Now, has it ever been done before? Has anybody been able to pick a perfect bracket, at least through the first weekend? Well, to the best of my knowledge, it's actually been done exactly 1 time. So apparently Greg Nigel, N-I-G-L, in 2019 picked all of the winners leading up to the Sweet 16, so the following weekend. And then he promptly busted and lost a game in the next round. So from my perspective, March Madness then takes on a whole new meaning, certainly from a statistical standpoint. If you want to bet on games or join an office pool or what have you, that's cool. And that can be a lot of fun. I've done it myself on many occasions, especially with my basketball friends. I wouldn't get too wrapped up in the whole thing, right? Because there's so much unpredictability and the challenges of picking the upsets and that sort of thing. Of course, that's why many of us still enjoy sports. We love to see something incredible happen, or at least in my case, and maybe you as well, I love seeing the underdog overcoming the odds, pulling off the tremendous upsets. So to me, the real March Madness involves the so-called Cinderella stories. The team that seems to come out of nowhere and make some kind of an improbable run to the Final Four, if not to the championship. Last year, in 2024's tournament, the men's tournament saw the number 11 seed, North Carolina State, the North Carolina State Wolfpack, make that kind of a special run. They strung together 9 straight wins in total, including their Final Four of the season in the NCAA tournament. And that allowed them to reach the men's Final Four for the first time since 1983, when they won the championship. In the Final Four, then, the Wolfpack lost to Purdue, and that basically concluded their season. But they matched the record then for the lowest seed ever to get to the Final Four. That is an 11 seed. And another 11 seed, and the one of which with which I'm most familiar, that also was something of a Cinderella story, was the George Mason University Patriots. I mention them because they were the number 11 seed back in 2006, and they made a run to the Final Four. And let me describe what happened. Again, why is that important to me? Well, because I graduated there with an undergraduate degree back in 1985 myself. So I have a bit of a connection there. So again, the year was 2006, and the George Mason University Patriots, who were coached by Jim Larrañaga, entered the tournament with a 23-7 record on the season up to that point. And they began the tournament with a 75 to 65 win over the 6th seed Michigan State. Michigan State had returned 4 starters from the previous year's squad, and that squad had reached the Final Four. So this was quite impressive. And arguably, though, GMU ended up being the better team in 2006. They pulled away later on in the second half, and they won comfortably, led by guard Folarin Campbell, who had 21 points, and remarkably, including a perfect 8 for 8 from the field, 2 for 2 from beyond the three-point arc, and then he was 3 for 5 from the free throw line. And speaking of free throws, the game, I don't think, would have even been that close or nearly as tight if GMU had actually made their free throws at any kind of reasonable clip. They ended up actually only shooting 12 for 26 from the charity stripe. So again, a few more made free throws, and that game wouldn't have even been as close as it was. And again, it was a 10-point victory. And so they rode the confidence of that first-round victory into a matchup with the mighty North Carolina Tar Heels. That game was played on March 19th, 2006. And the Tar Heels were the number 3 seed, and by the way, the reigning or the defending NCAA champions. Pretty intimidating. And indeed, UNC had this stifling defense in the first half, and they ended up taking a solid lead into the locker room, 27-20. But then George Mason scored the first 8 points in the second half and took the lead, and even though the game kind of remained tight throughout the rest of the game. And in fact, the game was tied at 54 with less than 3 minutes to go. But then Mason put together a few stops, actually made a few free throws down the stretch this time, and they won 65-60 to advance to the Sweet 16. That was especially sweet because the Patriots returned home, or more or less to more familiar territory in the Washington, D.C. area, playing at the nearby Verizon Center. And there they matched up against Wichita State, again before a partisan, almost like a home crowd, if you will. 4 Patriots scored in double figures, and Mason won 63-55 to advance to the Elite 8. So the final 8. And there they figured, or most people figured, that's where their run would end. Why? Because they were then facing the overall number 1 seed in the tournament, the University of Connecticut, UConn. The Huskies. So the very tall and very talented UConn Huskies boasted 4 players that would later be selected in the first round of the NBA draft that year. So, and in fact, they had 5 players in total amongst the first 40 NBA players drafted. And they were coached by Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun. So, as it turns out, in the Elite 8 and this berth to the Final Four on the line, a huge turnout of Mason faithful basically pushed the team and cheered them on, and they were hoping to again sort of play David to UConn's Goliath. They were down by as many as 12 points in the first half. They were still down by 9 points in the second, and yet the Patriots kept battling. They never gave up. And they rallied eventually to tie the game, and actually even took a 4-point lead on a couple of free throws by Lamar Butler with 23 seconds left. But UConn scored on a 2-point jump shot, and then they fouled, of course, trying to get Mason to the free throw line and trying to get the ball back. And it kind of worked because the GMU player missed the free throw. UConn got the rebound, and then Denham Brown tied the game on a layup basically as time expired, sending the game into overtime. And it continued to be tight, but GMU basically shocked the entire sports world by hanging on after missing a couple of free throws again late in the game that could have more or less sealed it. So they ended up hanging on, and they beat UConn in overtime 86-84. And so that ranks as one of the biggest upsets, in my view, in all of NCAA tournament history. And it propelled the team to Indianapolis for the first and their only Final Four appearance to date. Again, remember what happened here. 4 of UConn's players actually made it to they were drafted in the first round, and they actually ended up playing at least a few seasons each in the NBA. That's how good they were. How many of George Mason's players ended up in the NBA? Well, if you guessed 0, you'd be correct. None of them made it to the NBA. A couple played overseas professionally for a couple of years. But anyway, on that special day, on March 26, 2006, all 5 of the George Mason University Patriots starters scored in double figures. They played a team game. They hung in there, and they beat UConn to advance to the Final Four. And there they faced Florida, and even though they had a fairly decent first half, Florida was just too much for them, especially in the second half. They had so much firepower, some really good outside shooting, and they basically pulled away and led by double digits for most of the rest of the second half, eventually winning 73-58. And they won that as Florida ended up winning by a similar margin in the championship game against UCLA. And then they won the next season too. So Florida was a juggernaut themselves at that point. But it's still an amazing story, right? Largely unknown to the rest of the nation prior to the tournament, George Mason had suddenly become in vogue everywhere. Following the Final Four appearance, they examined the economic and social impacts of that appearance across the university. And Mason's improbable run was responsible for an estimated over $650 million in free publicity from television, print, and radio media. And as a result, the university reported an 800% increase in traffic to its official website, the university bookstore, and the Johnson Center, which typically averaged about $11,000 in weekly sales, brought in just shy of $1 million in the 10 days leading up to the Final Four. Usually what that means, by the way, is they're not just selling a bunch of books, they're selling all the merch. So they got all the hoodies and the caps and the jerseys, et cetera, et cetera. So they just went crazy. And admission inquiries also jumped an impressive 350% with and in fact, not only, overall, and then an additional almost 50% jump in out-of-state admission inquiries as well. So people were really hot to get to George Mason after that Final Four appearance. And so what happened then after the 2006 magical season? Well, they had a couple more solid years and reached the 3rd round of the NCAA tournament in 2011, which was the last year of Larrañaga's term as their head coach. After that, Paul Hewitt coached George Mason for the next 4 years, compiling a mediocre 65-66 record, no postseason appearances. Dave Paulson coached for the next 6 years, went 95-91 overall, but again, no NCAA tournament appearances. 2 more years by Kim English, who managed a 34-29 record for those 2 years. And then to bring the story full circle, guess who's coached George Mason the last 2 years? That would be one Tony Skinn. He's one of the players who helped make that magical run back in 2006. So again, now he's coaching the GMU Patriots men's team. They in his first year last year, they compiled a 20-12 record, and then this current season they managed a 27-8 overall record. So they're doing quite well. They didn't get into the NCAA tournament, however, but they're playing in the National Invitation Tournament, or the NIT, and they won their first round game. So as of this vlog, or as of, again, today, Saturday, March 22nd, they're going to be playing Bradley in the second round, and we'll see what happens. But if they can advance, and again, under their coach, who was one of the starters back in 2006, It'll be their first postseason success, real significant success, since they were the Cinderella story back in 2006, all those years ago. So, yeah, that's March Madness for you. A lot of other stories, but I thought I'd share this one because, again, I have this personal connection to George Mason, and it really was a magical run, as I've said on a couple of occasions back in 2006. All right, so who's your favorite team? How are they doing? How's your bracket? I didn't fill one out this year. I knew I'd bust early. I didn't have enough information about the teams. So, and again, with all the upsets, you just never know. But it's a lot of fun in that sense, and it is indeed madness at times. All right, that's it for today. Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. But in the meantime, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts, and find a unhappy person or a disconsolate person whose bracket has been busted, and give them a hug today. They need one. We'll see you soon.